The next item of business is a statement by Graham Day on Scottish Parliamentary elections 2021. The Minister will take questions at the end of his statement, so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Graham Day. Minister, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last December, Parliament unanimously approved legislation seeking to ensure the safe holding of the Scottish Parliament election on the 6th of May. I am pleased to have this opportunity to provide an update to members on developments since then. I appreciate that some have expressed genuine concern about the safe holding of the election. I do not wish to minimise or underestimate those concerns, but I do want to provide reassurance that all views are being heard and positive action has been and continues to be taken to ensure the safe delivery of the election. It is as a result of the hard work of electoral professionals over the course of the winter that I am confident that the election can go ahead on the 6th of May. This is also the view of Malcolm Burr, convener of the Electoral Management Board. One of the steps taken, the Scottish General Election Coronavirus Act, was the result of close working between all parties in this chamber and our electoral community. Amongst its provisions, the Act ensures the ability to postpone the election if required, but I am pleased to say that this does not seem necessary at present. It is fundamental for a democracy to hold scheduled elections, provided it is safe to do so. This Parliament has sat for 5 years, a year longer than originally intended, and many countries have already held elections successfully during the pandemic. It's also the case that 8 local government by-elections were held in Scotland over October and November. Ahead of these elections, the Electoral Management Board issued guidance developed with the assistance of Public Health Scotland. Those elections went well, and the Electoral Commission has used the lessons learned in publishing its guidance for the vote in May. A critical part of our preparations is making sure voters know how they can safely cast their votes. Returning officers are taking steps to ensure that polling places are safe environments with physical distancing, face masks, one-way systems and enhanced cleaning arrangements. Electoral registration officers are also working hard so that those who do not wish to vote in person are able to seek and obtain an absent vote. Our legislation last December moved the deadline for applying for a postal vote to the 6th of April to enable the expected increase in applications to be processed in time. The Government thereafter provided the resources needed for the electoral authorities to write out to every household in Scotland to explain who was registered at the address, who held postal votes there, and how anyone not covered could register or access postal voting. Electoral Commission research suggests that we might see an increase in postal voting from 17% of the electorate up to around 40%, and we've made resources available to allow electoral registration officers to deal with this level of increase and a little beyond that. It's not yet clear what the actual increase will be, but electoral registration officers are already reporting a significant rise in applications following a recent television advertising campaign and a notification letter from EROs. Additionally, the Chief Medical Officer has written to all shielding households to encourage those people and their families to consider obtaining a postal vote. As of the 19th of January, EROs across Scotland had received around 70,000 requests for postal vote application forms from electors. Completed application forms are now being returned, and the initial data from EROs confirms a significant increase in postal vote applications in February. The full figures are not yet available, but indications are that at least 60,000 people were granted a postal vote over the course of February. It's also clear that at least 10 local authority areas now have at least 20% of their electorate issued with a postal vote. We've made it possible for anyone who is unable to vote in person due to testing positive or having to self-isolate to apply for a proxy vote, an option which is available until 5 p.m. on the day of poll. In addition, there is legislation before the Parliament at the moment which will now allow someone who has already appointed a proxy to change their appointed proxy if the original is no longer available to vote on their behalf. These changes to both postal and proxy voting are intended to help anyone who wishes to vote in May's election to do so, no matter their personal circumstances. So to summarise, anyone can apply for a postal vote before the 6th April deadline, and those who find themselves unable to vote in person due to coronavirus advice can apply for a proxy to be appointed up until 5 p.m. on polling day. And of course, I would emphasise that returning officers are carrying out risk assessments and that polling stations will be set up on the basis of advice provided by the Electoral Commission in conjunction with Public Health Scotland, so it will be safe to vote in person. In addition to the Electoral Commission's detailed guidance on running a COVID-secure election, the convener of the EMB has been exercising his power to issue directions to returning officers, a power that this Parliament bestowed upon him last June in the Scottish Elections Reform Act. He has directed that no more than 800 electors are to be allocated to a single polling station and that counts should occur in the daytime. The convener has also set out a risk assessment approach for returning officers to follow, and he has confirmed that the power under the recent Act to allow polling over multiple days is not required. In relation to the count, it seems inevitable that the results of the election will take longer to arrive. Ensuring physical distance while also allowing the process to be scrutinised means that not all constituencies will be counted simultaneously. It's expected that most counting will occur over the Friday and the Saturday following polling day. Returning officers will be talking to candidates locally about arrangements, and those discussions are important to achieve a shared understanding of what will happen in practice. I'll now turn to the important topic of campaigning, Presiding Officer. I know that parties have not been leafleting or campaigning door to door during lockdown, and alternatives to face-to-face campaigning can be employed. But clearly, we would all like to know when it will be possible to undertake usual, or as close to usual as possible, campaign activity. The Electoral Commission is preparing guidance for candidates and campaigners, and its guidance will align with what is permitted under the necessary public health restrictions. I can confirm that under the stay-at-home regulations, it is permitted for candidates and agents to travel to the constituency as necessary, as this is work or volunteering which cannot be done from home. It's also been suggested that the leadership of each party should also be able to travel to any given constituency. That is something we are looking at, though we should bear in mind that the regulations currently prevent all of us from leaving home and travelling between local authorities for work that can be done from home. The update to the strategic framework that was published last week set out a plan for gradual easing of current measures when the epidemiological conditions allow that to be done safely. The update included a likely phasing of easing of restrictions at intervals of at least 3 weeks to allow assessment of data and of progress in suppression of the virus. In line with that, I will advise Parliament that leafleting can commence from the 15th of March, subject to the restrictions on social gatherings in level 4 areas easing to allow up to 4 people from 2 different households to meet outdoors. Guidance will be issued to keep everyone safe. And I'm sure that candidates and campaigners will accept the need to strictly observe the need for mitigation measures such as physical distancing, the wearing of face masks where appropriate, ensuring hand hygiene and not car sharing. Guidance will also be issued on safe arrangements for liaising with volunteers and minimising the handling of materials. Face-to-face campaigning on the doorstep cannot commence at the same time as leafleting. Careful consideration has been given to the role of canvassing during an ongoing pandemic, the risks associated with it, where allowing doorstep campaigning would sit with other non-election restrictions, and how the public might react to having political campaigners at their door. I recognise, however, that there is an appetite for it to be permitted in due course. And in light of discussion with clinical advisers and providing the stay-at-home restrictions are able to be lifted, face-to-face doorstep campaigning can be permitted from April 5, subject to the virus being sufficiently suppressed. Now, that decision will be based on whether the infection rate as an average across Scotland has fallen to 50 per 100,000 or less. The number which the WHO considers as evidence that the pandemic is sufficiently under control, and alongside this, test positive numbers must sit below 5%. I should add that if the infection rate in a specific council area were to exceed 100 per 100,000, then canvassing would have to be suspended for safety reasons in that specific local authority until the rate fell below that number. For information for the Chamber, the cumulative 7-day incidence per 100,000 of the population by specimen date to the 27th of February is 79.6. and the latest 7-day average test positivity rate is 3.9%. Once the restrictions permit, it will be a judgment call for parties as to whether they should pursue such activity, whether it will be welcomed by the public, and in what type of specific locality. They also need to be conscious of striking the right balance between ensuring only one person approaches a doorstep, but providing reassurance for canvassers in having a colleague close by for safety. The numbers of people who can be together at any one point must be in line with the broader restrictions on social interaction that are in place at the time. But this approach, I hope, balances political engagement with protecting public health. I'm afraid, however, that activities such as street stalls and physical hustings and giving voters a lift to polling stations cannot proceed, given the circumstances we find ourselves in. These limitations have been discussed in recent weeks with the business managers of all parties, and I believe all parties are supportive of them. I hope that the statement, Presiding Officer, has provided reassurance to members on the enormous amount of work underway across our electoral community to ensure that the election in May can be conducted safely in an adjusted form. And I want to conclude my remarks by offering sincere thanks to all those involved in preparations for the polling and the counting of votes, and also those representatives of the parties which sit in this Parliament and who have engaged entirely constructively both around the shaping of this guidance and more general planning throughout the process we've gone through over the recent months. The approach to those discussions has demonstrated a collective willingness to be responsible in our approach to campaigning, and I look forward to seeing that maintained in the heat of the campaign. Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Minister. The Minister will now take questions on the issues raised. Now, I tend to allow 20 minutes around about that. I try to get everybody in. I know you're all interested in this. I call Miles Briggs to be followed by Sarah Boyd. Mr. Briggs.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I thank the Minister for advance sight of his statement and welcome the clarity which he's outlined today. This year's Scottish Parliament election will be an event unlike any other, but I'm sure we'll all welcome the opportunity to soon get back out speaking to voters as soon as it's safe to do so. And whilst it's important that campaigns are able to operate as much as possible, we need to make sure we do not compromise any of the public health achievements which we've achieved in recent weeks and months. Can I ask the Minister a couple of questions specifically? When will the guidance he's mentioned be published so that political parties have the time to safely put in place advice to all campaigners? And if we are going to see a fair election, it's vital that strict purdah rules also cover ministers. Does the Minister agree with this? And in that case, will the Minister confirm that government statements and briefings will be led by public officials when this Parliament rises on the 24th of March? Minister.
Presiding Officer, guidance will be issued as soon as possible. Purdah rules will be followed as they always are. The First Minister touched upon the point that Miles Briggs raised, I think, at FMQs last week, and further detail on that will be forthcoming. But I would point out to Miles Briggs that the most important thing about these briefings is the assurance that the First Minister provides the public, because we are still in the midst of a pandemic.
Sarah Boyd, followed by Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and the Minister for advance notice of his statement. I agree our top priority must be public health and safety for everyone involved in the election, staff and voters. Can the Minister say what modelling has been done on the impact of the election campaign on the prevalence of COVID and the likelihood of people to vote? And will he be giving us more clarity on postal votes? Because I know you've referenced 10 local authorities across the country. Councillors have raised with me concerns about safety at polling stations, for example, what happens if someone can't or won't wear a mask. And can you clarify the guidance will address issues such as canvassing tenements and flats from the 5th of April? Don't we need clarity on these issues rather than letting up to the different political parties to make that kind of judgment?
Can I just remind members not to use the term you? I'm flailing against the wind here after 5 years, but I keep trying. Minister.
Presiding Officer, I thought you were going to remind the member about multiple questions within a single question, and I've lost track, and I apologise, and I will come back to Sarah Boyd if there's anything. Postal votes, the postal vote numbers we will update on a weekly basis from the 15th of March. In terms of people not wearing masks at polling stations, I take it she means entering polling stations. There will be additional members of staff on duty at polling places to encourage members to do that. But she makes a valid point, and the police will have a role to play in the election in this regard as well. In terms of what buildings can and can't be canvassed, that really is, I think, for the parties to determine. I don't think it's for us to be prescriptive about you cannot canvass such and such a building or whatever. I think this is one, and I am confident that the parties will exercise common sense in their approach to this. And I apologise if there's any other questions I haven't picked up. I will come back to Sarah Boyle-Killen.
And I remind the Minister, as the front bencher, Ms Boyd is entitled to ask within her time certain number of questions, if she wishes. Just to correct the record for you, Minister. Patrick Harvey, followed by Willie Rennie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As well as objective safety being important, the perception of safety is also important. That will apply to political parties, for example, making judgments on that last point about canvassing in enclosed spaces such as tenement closes, but it's also relevant to voters turning up to vote in person. What action is going to be taken to build public confidence so that people have a high degree of confidence in the safety of the voting process? The perception is important just as much as the reality.
Minister.
I think Patrick Harvey makes some good points there about the perception of safety. So let's deal with this first in the context of political parties. Self-evidently, it would be a very bad idea for parties to descend on an area en masse, having car shared. I mean, this kind of thing is completely unacceptable in the current climate. And as I say, I'm confident that the parties will adhere to that. In terms of public confidence, I think Patrick makes a good point. Clearly, the larger number of postal votes that we can see issued or taken up will ensure that there will be fewer individuals going to the polling station. So if it's seen not to be particularly busy, that will give confidence. But clearly there is a job to be done between now and then in terms of boosting public confidence to go out and vote on the day. I think the fact that we have 11 council by-elections taking place in the next few weeks will give clear evidence of the safety that surrounds being able to vote. And I think it's also incumbent on us as political parties and as politicians to encourage the public that it is possible to go and cast their vote in person if that's what they're required to do.
Willie Rennie, followed by Bill Kidd.
I'm grateful for the Minister's approach to this issue throughout. We've worked together constructively. We are content with what he's set out today. It's important to have safe voting and a safe campaign in order to have a valid election campaign. But can I press him further on the COVID briefings? If the First Minister felt compelled last week to answer a question about Alex Salmond in the COVID briefing, how will she avoid answering a question about the campaign in the election if she continues to front those COVID briefings? Minister.
I think Willie Rennie knows full well that the First Minister would be able to negotiate quite comfortably such a situation. I'm a little bit surprised about this obsession about the public briefings. These are public health briefings that have proved essential throughout the past year. And for Willie Rennie, who I have great respect for, to imply that somehow the First Minister would take advantage of that is beneath him, frankly.
Now, I've got lots of members want to have short questions with short answers. Don't think I'm going to get to everybody, but I'll try. Bill Kidd, followed by Oliver Mundell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank the Minister. Local authorities will need to make a range of changes to polling places to ensure they are COVID safe. Can the Minister provide any further information as to what steps the Scottish Government is taking to support local authorities with the costs of introducing safety measures?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, that has been done. A sum, I think, totalling £10 million has been set aside for the delivery of the election. All reasonable asks have been met, and there is a contingency there for any further reasonable asks to be met in terms of delivering the election as we go forward.
Thank you. Oliver Mundell, followed by Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. These are difficult decisions which require a very careful balance between public health and enabling the democratic process to take place. I know the Minister appreciates that, but does he accept that the idea of giving any form of campaigning the green light will cause concern to some who understandably remain anxious? And can he therefore reassure Parliament that any further relaxation of campaign rules will be mindful of public confidence in ongoing restrictions and seek to avoid any perception that different rules apply to politicians?
Minister.
I agree entirely with Oliver Mundell's point. I think it is important that the public see what we are agreeing to today in the right light. And there will be people who will be concerned about this. It then becomes incumbent, as I've said a number of times, on the parties to behave in a way which does not disquiet the public. And I have every confidence that can be done. But I think he does make a valid point, and it's a reminder to all of us about the concerns that the public have currently, and we should be mindful of that as we enter the campaign.
Annabel Ewing, followed by Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Minister mentioned in his statement that it will be possible for anyone who is unable to vote in person due to testing positive or having to self-isolate to apply for a proxy vote, and that up until 5 p.m. on the day of poll. I think this is an important measure, but can the Minister advise as to what the Scottish Government will do to ensure that people are aware that this facility is there, and also to explain how, in terms of the mechanics, they would actually make such an application? Thank you.
Minister.
President Officer, information to that end will be provided on every polling card. The Electoral Commission are making voters aware through their public awareness campaign, and their booklet on the Scottish Parliament elections that will be delivered to every household week commencing the 22nd of March. Returning officers and electoral registration officers will publicise availability of emergency proxies through social media and other press nearer the time. I think all round we will be able to address the matter the member rightly raises.
Colin Smith, followed by Willie Coffey.
Thank you, President Officer. Deciding to hold the election in May rather than wait a few weeks until the end of July when everyone is vaccinated means that cross-local authority travel restrictions will still be in place. So how does the Minister justify telling the public that for health reasons they can't visit their loved ones, even in the garden, if they happen to live in another council area, but election candidates will be able to travel in some cases for regional candidates from one side of the country to the other to knock on the doors of anyone asking for the vote? That is, Minister, one rule for politicians and one for the public. And simply saying to parties foregoing democratic engagement on the doorstep isn't the solution.
Minister.
Yeah, well, I'm a little bit disappointed to hear Colin Smith's question, given that his party has engaged constructively in getting us to this point as well. But I would make the point to him, it's one thing facilitating an election agent and a candidate to travel to a constituency where they may be standing or working in and they don't happen to live in. We're not talking about mass transference of activists across Scotland. We're talking about individuals travelling to take part in a major democratic event.
Willie Coffey, followed by John Scott.
Thanks, President Officer. Many countries around the world have held elections during the pandemic. Can the Minister confirm that the Scottish Government has been looking at what lessons can be learned from those elections and put those lessons in place?
Minister.
President Officer, there's been 83 national elections or referenda held across the globe during the pandemic, and a number of the measures that we will be deploying have been deployed in those. But I would say to Willie Coffey, perhaps more relevant have been the lessons we've learned from our own domestic by-elections that have taken place. There's quite a lot been derived from that. And as I say, a number of measures, for example, the additional member of staff at the polling station to direct voters, limiting the number of voters in each box, are examples of things that we've learned from these by-elections.
John Scott, followed by Maureen Watt.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the arrangements made for polling day when only 800 people will be allowed at each polling station. Some polling stations would usually expect more people at them and some less. Will there be an effort made by local authorities to direct voters to different polling stations and draw voters' attention to different polling stations where voters will be required to vote at a polling station which is not the one they would usually vote at?
Minister.
I think we need to draw a distinction between polling places and polling stations. So what we're looking at is extending the number of essentially rooms within a school, for example, or a building where people will be directed to. So yes, John Scott's right, there will be some changes to venues will take place across the country. But essentially this is about limiting the number of people who would enter a particular part of a building to cast their vote. That's what we're predominantly looking at.
Maureen Watt, followed by James Kelly.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Minister provide any further information on what steps the Government is taking to raise awareness of postal voting, particularly amongst the elderly, vulnerable and less mobile, since it will not be possible for anyone other than possibly family to give them a lift to the polling station?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, there's been extensive work done already on raising awareness of the option of postal voting. As I say, the proxy voting aspect of this has been developed as well. And of course, the CMO has written out to everyone on the shielding list. So I think we've covered the bases as far as it's possible to do. But, you know, again, the opportunity is there for the parties to take their share of responsibility and increase awareness of this. I think we've done a reasonable job thus far, but I'm happy to hear from members of all parties if they have further ideas they think we should take on board.
James Kelly, followed by Ruth Maguire.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. For the election to proceed, public will need to be confident in the safety of the polling places and also the protection afforded across constituencies. Can I therefore ask the Minister, in terms of the by-elections that are taking place, will there be an open and transparent assessment of any issues that arise, and will the Minister update Parliament on any problems that crop up?
Minister. I think it's a fair point to make. I mean, we have these by-elections coming forward. There is always an ongoing assessment of that. What I'm quite happy to do is to arrange a further briefing with the Electoral Management Board to the one that we had a few weeks ago to provide members with answers to questions such as that and to find out if any further issues have been identified through the by-election process and what measures we would take by way of response.
And Ruth Maguire.
Presiding Officer, safety is of paramount importance. Can the Minister expand on what measures are being taken to ensure the protection of the local authority workforce involved in the operation of the elections, both on polling day and at the count, please?
Minister.
Again, the member makes a very good point. The safety of election workers is paramount, and there's been extensive planning done around social distancing and other measures. But there is something else that we have been looking at, which I'll share with members, and that is the possibility of providing further reassurance by having asymptomatic testing to everyone who might be present at the count. Now, that's been welcomed in principle by the EMB, but there are a number of issues to be considered, not least of all the one which concerns the returning officers wanting that to take place the evening before the count in order, rightly, that they could replace any workers who tested positive. Countering that, however, is the fact it's believed that lateral flow testing is of less case-finding value if conducted the evening before someone goes to their workplace than if it's done a short time before they attend. The other point here is that this has to be nationwide. So the EMB are therefore taking soundings from all 32 returning officers at the moment, and we will consider this matter further when we have the responses concerned.
Thank you. That concludes questions on the statement. I thank members and the Minister as we managed to get all the questions in. Be a short pause before we move on to the next item of business.